Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our webinar today on IT projects in local government. Delighted to be joined by Chris Webber and Simon Adcock. How are you, gents?
Well,
Thanks, Phil.
well,
And we will kick off. Let me just, while we're waiting on those slides, let me do an acknowledgement of country. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the many lands on which we're meeting today. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. Welcome to everybody else for joining us. Quick bit of housekeeping. 40-minute discussion and presentations followed by up to 20 minutes of Q&A. So Simon, Chris and I hopped on a session yesterday to do our presentations and ended up having a conversation. So we thought we'd do a hybrid. We're going to play it a little bit by ear. We want you to challenge us. We want you to ask us plenty of questions. And really, this is an opportunity to learn from two lads who've been in the field for a long time. I've got the war stories and the scars and the wounds and the experience to share with you. So pretty informal. So ask the questions and away we'll go. In terms of the agenda, so look, as a quick introduction from me, I'll talk a little bit about Symphony 3 shortly. We'll then hand over to Chris. I'll get Chris to do a quick intro on himself and his organisation and let him bring up his slides. We'll get him to talk for 10-15 minutes. We'll then hand over to Simon, again do a quick intro, and he'll do a presentation. And we can take questions at the end, but as I said, we're happy to take questions as we go. I'm hoping the two guys will argue with each other and ask each other questions as they go as well. That's why we're here. And at latest, we'll have you out of here by 1 o'clock. So grab your lunch, get involved, and we'll see how we go. Just a little bit on Symphony 3. Most of you know who we are. We've been around since 2011. We help councils with digital enablement largely. We've got integration as our core business. We've got a SWAS solution, so that's software with a service called SmartGlue. And surrounded by that, we've got some great digital tools, things like websites, forms, and most recently AI, which is an AI infringement review assistant is the one we've launched most recently, but that's for another time. Work with councils, large and small, around Australia and New Zealand. You'll see some of them there. I know that a few of you are on this call, so I hope to hear from you guys as we go through the session. So just let me welcome Chris and Simon. So just firstly, Symphony 3, part of our go-to-market is partnering. We partner with some of the ERP vendors and some of the other vendors around the local government space. But most recently, the two guys have joined as partners, really just to build out the ecosystem of experts. We know we can't do everything. For example, I know that Chris has done a huge amount of work with some of the rural councils in New South Wales that he'll talk about, where we can work together. Similarly, Simon and I have done a lot of work with Salesforce implementations with councils that I would know of. So really it's about building out that ecosystem around our SmartGlue solution with core expertise, of which delighted to welcome the two lads as our first two consulting partners. So Chris, I might jump in and we'll get you to kick us off with some questions. And first, just give us a little 30-second background and bio on yourself while you're bringing your slides up, and kind of what your background is, where you've been working, councils you've worked with, etc.
Yep. All right. G'day, everybody. And thanks, Fergal, and look forward to the session today. So my background, originally born and bred in regional New South Wales, moved to the big city, was working in sort of investment banking space for about 10 years, and then wanted to move home and got into local government. Didn't really know much about it prior to that. That was in the vicinity of 15, 20 years ago. And then since then been working with worked at a couple of the larger councils in the regional areas, and then have worked together with certainly smaller councils in more recent times in regional and rural New South Wales. A lot of what we've done is trying to work with people, and particularly work with councils who just don't have the resources to do a lot of the big stuff that they would love to do. So in terms of what I'm going to talk about today, it's about trying to just give some of that experience and just a thought process that people can sort of take away. But I really do encourage people to ask as many questions as they can. Sometimes you don't always think about the experience until you get asked the question that prompts it to come back into the front of mind.
Right. Well, look, off you go, Chris. I'll take questions as they come through. If you're too shy to put them in the box, send me a text message or an email, and I'll pick them up as well, and I'll ask them. But over to you, Chris.
Excellent. Thank you. So, like, as we said, we're going to try and keep this pretty conversational. What I'm going to talk about today, and I've written the slides in such a way that if you get a copy of them later, it will prompt some of the same messages. If you spend your life in IT, you're probably not going to hear anything today that you haven't heard before. What I'm hoping I can do is potentially just give some experience and some lessons learned in terms of how can I help get that messaging across, and how can we put things in place that will help us with future projects or future works. So I'm going to talk about what I've seen in my experience in terms of successful projects, some of the common mistakes we've seen. And by mistakes, a lot of those mistakes are literally just because people are often trying to do more than is reasonable with the capacity that we have available to us. Lessons learned from delivering and sometimes having to revive some projects, and then things to think about for the next project. So, like I said, you're going to see quite a few catchphrases today, but I'll try and make it meaningful. So what do the successful projects have? First of all, they've got a plan, and that's as obvious as it gets, but often we are busy. We do struggle sometimes to have the time to sit down and do the documentation that we would like to do. The plan doesn't always have to be multi-page, massively detailed, depending on the nature of the project, but you do need a plan. And the plan will help you identify what is practically achievable. So sometimes we will set a name of a project, or we will set some of these things, but we won't actually identify what we can practically achieve versus what we would like to achieve. And managing expectations around the gap between what we'd like to achieve and what we practically can achieve is really important. Clear ownership, just to remove any gaps about who is doing what from that side. That's a very important one as well. As you get more, like if you get staff turnover, or if you get changes in the resources that are allocated to a project, clear ownership becomes critical all the way through. Making sure they're resourced appropriately. We often resource and plan on a best case scenario, and we just have to be very practical around, is best case scenario realistic all the time? We'd love it to be, but often there'll be other things pop up that we aren't expecting. There'll be day job pressures come into play. There'll be other factors, and we just need to make sure things are resourced. We often discuss people often hear the 80-20 rule about if we can deliver 80%, that's a good win, but then you see frustrations come in when we can't deliver 100. And it's really important we're able to manage expectations. Organisation stability is important, and good change management is important. And again, they're all common terms. The key is, how do we make it work practically for us? Now, if you're a large council, you may have a team of people who can work on these things and be in a position where you can do all this stuff really, really well. But you may also be in a smaller organisation where one person is doing all these jobs, and that can put a lot of extra pressure on people, particularly when, depending on the nature of the project, it could be around the day job. So
in terms of a plan, Chris, just a quick question for you. What does a good plan look like for a small under-resourced council versus a larger, organisation? Are there any key attributes that need to be in that plan that, maybe it's stating the obvious, but
yeah. So in terms of the clear milestones, clear milestones of what do we need before we start, who needs to do what, do we have all the resources, are all the right people at the table? So plan of who's doing what. Clear milestones of where are we touching base to say, are we on track? Are we not on track? What do we need to do if we have to bring it on track? Or did we just set too a too aggressive agenda or a too unrealistic agenda because of other factors that may have come into play. So for me, it's around having good milestones, clear tasks of what needs to be done in between those milestones, and doing that in a way that non-IT people will understand as well. It's got to be something that everybody can understand. There's a few people. There's a process out there where some people, and I think Simon might talk to this, but will often want to write. You almost want to write your final report before your first report to say this is what we want to get out of this project. And so, is everything we're doing working towards achieving what our goal is? But having those clear milestones, checkpoints, and ownership with the tasks and responsibilities in between.
Two things pop up. And we've had a conversation in here recently about and I'm thinking of terminology. So done, and the definition of done is one we've had. So I'm wondering, is terminology something you come across, and what is done is an interesting one. And then the second point there, writing. I'll try and shut up after this. The outcomes before you start. I mean, we in our projects here we use the AWS working backwards philosophy. So we actually write a press release of what success looks like and what we want to achieve from the project. First thing we do, start the project.
And it's a really good way to do it, because if you're doing a press release, it should be in language that everybody can understand, and it should be something that everybody can reference back to. And it does look very, very different for a small council to a large council in terms of what done looks like. As you say, councils, some people will have heard the term practically complete, and you sometimes hear the concept of we've done all the sort of heavy lifting, but we've still got a few things we need to tidy up at the end. Some people will call done when we've sort of done that practically complete and it's now more business as usual and it just gets handed over to support. And there are other people who will go, no, until we've ticked every box. It's about setting that clear expectation up front of, and this is that 80-20 discussion. It's about setting that clear expectation of what is the minimum we want to achieve, what would we love to achieve, and what's the balance of those two things, finding the middle ground between those two things.
Do you have a question, Simon, or a comment?
I think the question about what does a plan look like? I think it's as simple as knowing who's doing what, when they're doing it, and exactly what it is. And so it doesn't matter how big or whether it's a Gantt chart or whether it's a Kanban board, as long as everyone knows what they're doing when they've got to do it, that plan is fit for purpose.
Just a comment here from Mark Ackland. Thanks for joining us, Mark. Remembering too that an IT project is more often a business project. Key distinction in terms of ownership and change capacity. And a question from Anthony. Organizational stability ? Your list is a mix of actions, factors that are within circle of influence and outside. How do you manage that?
That one I might touch on in a couple of the other slides, because it is not pretending it's easy. So I might come back to that one if that's all right.
Perfect.
So,
Take it on notice.
Yep. And I will get you to repeat it, because I will have gotten exactly some of the comments by the time we get to the end. The common mistakes, I actually don't like the word mistakes, but I guess this one's going to tie into the next slide around lessons learned. We often don't know, we often underestimate the details and effort required. And I don't mean that to sound bad. It's often the devil is in the detail. Often when we're doing scoping of projects and initiation of documents and all those types of things, we know what we understand from the concepts of conversations, from some of the research that may have been done. But again, if you don't have the time and the resources to work your way through all of the detailed requirements, the details often slightly underestimated. If you're in a bigger council again and you have full project teams that can do this research, then you may have the ability to get some of that. In smaller councils where it is around the day job, often we just don't understand. We don't know what we don't know until we get to that point. So sometimes we will build in a good amount of contingency, and other times we may underestimate the contingency required. including all stakeholders at the start. And sorry, I can't remember who made that comment about the business, but this is probably the most common thing that I would say is that one of the things that we often have is what is technically an IT project? Where is IT the driver versus where is IT a facilitator and an enabler for the business? In most cases, you want IT to be the facilitator and help the business achieve what they're looking for. So the business needs to be driving majority of projects. Now, you will get network projects, you'll get software projects, you will get all different types, but you do need to include all stakeholders and the right people need to be leading it from that start. I'm not going to go into these much in detail just because of time, but we often, when we're time poor, we will do we'll only do the testing of the common scenarios. We need to make sure, particularly in software type products, that testing is often as much about people learning as it is about testing, depending on whether it's an upgrade, a new implementation, all those types of things. So it's about getting the balance right of testing for the purpose of making sure it works, but also testing in a method of learning, practically learning, so that as we get closer and closer to go lives, people are very, very self-sufficient. And this is almost an extension of the other point that was noted, not having time to look at the process. So very much what we do is about, it's ultimately ending up in a business process that hopefully is better than it was yesterday. So what we tend to find is if we don't have time to look at the process and we aren't looking at it holistically, you can have significant changes being made on the run that can delay implementations, becoming sort of business as usual, and will create frustrations. People will be going, hold on, what's changed? Who's doing what now? How has it changed? So not having time to look at processes as a whole is something that we see doesn't stop projects going live, but it stops the smoothness of how well they can go live. Attempting too many projects at the same time, and again, what I mean by that is we often do schedule ourselves based on a best case scenario. We see people do an amazing amount of work, which is great. But in a lot of cases, the more work you do, the more work you get. So it's about how do we balance delivering quality products and projects at the same time as either doing some BAU work or just trying to do too many projects at the same time, which may impact the timeliness or the quality of some of the works. And the other thing we see is often internal project resources being utilised for BAU. So you may have a situation where you've got vacant positions, you've brought someone in and you ask them to learn the business before they get involved in the projects. And if it's not being well documented, well communicated and well managed, you can see project resources ending up in business as usual roles, which will then lead to delays in the project. Sometimes it can be very helpful because they really learn how to do the job and then they add value in different methods, which is great. But again, just about managing that expectation and managing that balance. In terms of lessons learned, so just an acknowledgement right up front, most people are busy. Most of the people I've worked with in local government have been good people, hardworking, capable, often pushing themselves to do lots of work. It's how do we find the balance? So when we're talking about projects, everyone usually already has a pretty full day job. The project work, and especially in the smaller councils, is often done around that day job. So how much time can be dedicated to some of these things varies according to the organisation. And priorities will vary across the organisation. Local government is probably one of the broadest sector or broader service type of industries that you will get anywhere. So we don't have the same types of situations that, say, some of the large corporates do, where they will have massive scale but a narrower focus. Councils are delivering a breadth of services, often upwards of 50 to 70 different service areas. And often in small councils, it'll be one person delivering that service, or even less than a person. They'll have multiple services to deliver. And it's just about understanding that. So it's about being realistic and not overloading people unrealistically.
Any tips around protecting your IT resources from BAU, Chris? Any practical examples of how to do it?
Well, look, it varies according to whether you're a large council or a small council. Some of the things that we see councils do is if you are working on projects, you may work, and this can equally work from on the operational side of things. With the balance of work from home and work in the office, you may have a situation where you do 3 days a week in the office, and that is business as usual work. You do 2 days a week from home, and that is project focus. You're always going to have, if you're in an operational role, you're always going to get calls, you're always going to get day-to-day things coming up. But if you can create that clean air in some method, whether it be work from home, whether it be isolated, whether you create a space for like a project space where people can go and just focus on the projects, those types of things. But all this varies according to how big is the project, how many people are involved, what's the flow-on effect of all these things. If that makes sense. In terms of understanding, the other lesson learned from delivering and reviving projects is about understanding the implications of the project. So what are the understanding of the implications of the project? So I'll come back to the cost one in a sec, but some projects will be about reducing risk, so not so much about saving money. Some will be about creating efficiencies. Some will be a combination of those things. Some could be about improving customer experience. There's a whole raft of rationale. Some could just be about we're upgrading because our product's getting to end of life. There's a whole raft of reasons why we would be working on IT projects. So it's about understanding the implications and being able to manage that. And in small councils in particular, and even in large, depending on the council, large investments in IT, and again, large relative to the council, can be hard to justify. So if you are in a council who, particularly, let's say a smaller council with large road networks and those things, you will sometimes struggle to be able to justify large IT spends because that is a lot of money that could be being spent on roads and those things. And how do we make sure we're providing good information and providing good background around why this is important, the value that it adds, and working through that with our executive, with our elected members in some cases, and being able to understand and be able to, and justify is probably the wrong word, but being able to explain why this stuff is important on that side. The other one,
Yep. There. Sorry to interrupt you again, but how do councils prioritise their work? So how can they do this within the year, or is it all done at budget time and before, kind of 1st of July, which kind of leans into I think your last comment a little bit.
Yep. Every council will be a little bit different. So the larger the council's budget, the more flexibility they often have, but also usually the larger plan of work. So the budget time is when you obviously do your large requests. So if you're going to do large scale upgrades or whatever else, unless you're doing these intra-year because something's changed, you'll be doing most of that around your budget time. A lot of people do their planning between November and February. Budgets go in March, April, go on public exhibition, get approved, and then they're ready to go 1 July. But you will still get factors that come up through the year. Some councils will leave, for lack of a better description, a discretionary IT budget because they know things will come up. There'll be opportunities they want to take advantage of from that side. It's more about if you've got a roadmap or a plan, how are you able to take advantage of what opportunities and what budget is available? And how can you be flexible based on the budgets that are available? You may not get to do some years the projects you want to do because you don't have the money to, but how do you make sure you can do some of the ones that you do want to do and also then make sure you're planning for the future? It could be about putting money away into reserves over a couple of years to then do the larger pieces of work. It could be about freeing up resources to do it in such a way that you have that time. Budgets are very council specific. I mean, all councils go through a very similar process, but how they manage their IT budgets is generally unique, or not unique, but based on how each council operates. So some councils will have an IT budget and they just have to schedule they roll it forward every year. Others will have a capital sort of budget, like an IT reserve, and they can pull it out for larger scales. How they manage their budget is really about where council's financial position and where IT fits into that. The other one around, I guess, where we have to help, again, don't know if revive's the right word, but if we work on the basis that most people come to work to do a good job, things sometimes just go wrong. So could be we've added too many projects onto someone's list. It could be someone just got it wrong. Could be a whole raft of reasons again. I find if we have lots of conversations about who's to blame, it doesn't actually help us. So when we talk about the lessons learned, it's about ultimately how do we just try and make it better than it was yesterday? How do we say, all right, for whatever reason we are where we are, and how do we focus on fixing whatever it is we need to do or getting it back on track, and just say, all right, we'll learn from that. But at the end of the day, how do we focus our time and resource on getting it back where we would like it to be? So in terms of things to think about for the next project, again, I don't think I would have said anything today so far that people haven't already heard before. It's more how do we practically, and I'll hopefully when I answer that other question in a second, I'll give a couple of examples, but right at the start, clear outcomes of what we want to achieve. The documentation, focusing the documentation on quality rather than quantity. I've seen successful projects with relatively small volumes of documentation, but it was really high quality. And I've seen projects that have fallen off the rails with huge amounts of documentation that just wasn't quality in its entirety. Certainly aspects of it were, but people actually got lost in the volume of it. So focusing documentation on quality, understanding how you move from testing to production, and this one, I should actually have an extra point in there about including the business process, because that is the ultimate driver of most of these things that we do, particularly from a software perspective. And this can significantly vary based on the product and the type of product. So if it's a networking issue or a hardware issue, where you do your testing is often the device that becomes production. If it's software, you may have a mechanism where, again, testing environments become production, or you've got environments where testing has to be replicated into a production environment and manual changes done. Just understanding about what that looks like. Thinking, do we have the resources to do this project well? And if the answer to that is no, that's okay, but decide, is that something we still want to move ahead with, or is it something we should be putting in for later? And then, again, where possible, break the deliverables into smaller pieces of work. So with councils being as diverse as what they are and having that broader section, you sort of have two types of scenarios, or two common, particularly with software, where you'll either be delivering something that is going across the organisation, for example, a payroll system, a timesheet system, something like that, or you might have something that is much more narrow focused and larger in scale. It's about breaking it down so that from a deliverable, a training, a testing point of view, how can you break that down into bite-sized chunks? But also when you roll it out, how can you support it well so that people have a good experience? They understand the process, they understand how the technology will help enable, and then they work through what that looks like. The other one that probably I see this a little bit more so because I am an external person to councils these days, is that you often bring in external people to help for a project. There's not always the part of the plan for what happens when that help's no longer on tap. Do we have the resources in-house to take over some of those functions that external help may have been providing? And that's something that often not so much is forgotten about, but it does fall away and sort of does end up on the back burner a little bit, because the focus and the time is on getting the project up and running, getting it delivered. And if you don't have a sort of post-go-live plan for how you convert that and transition it into the business as usual, that can sort of cost councils quite a bit of money into the long term. Now, if I try and answer that question from earlier in terms of outside influence, like where it's inside, where it is within our influence or sphere of influence,
Yeah.
you control the stuff you can and you work with your vendors. So you do need to have good relationships with your vendors. I walk into a number of places, not always councils, but we do walk into places and they'll say, oh, our relationship with our vendors is not very good. We don't like them. They don't get back to us. All those things. At the end of the day, we have to find a way to make it work together, whatever that relationship looks like. So I find there tends to be four main bodies involved. First of all, there'll be the executive around what expectations are from your executive, and they're the ones who are ultimately putting forward a budget to be approved. You will have your project delivery people who are involved. You will have your vendors who are involved, and then you'll have your end users. Sometimes your end users and your project team will be the same. It's about those four groups of people all being on the same page and working towards that clear plan. Now, the vendors' outcomes may be slightly different to council's outcomes because council will be looking at an overall process, an overall improvement in how we do things. The vendor may be looking at just getting this product in and moving on to the next one. It's about having that clear communication and just regular comms, and not necessarily always formal, but just having that regular piece of work is this is where we're at, this is what's on us, this is what's on you. And if we've got some that are in the middle that we need to talk about, we come to an agreement about what that is, even if we don't always like the outcome. We make sure we provide clarity. And to our executive team, it's about making sure they understand, if they're not already involved or not driving it, that they understand how is this going to benefit us. And that almost goes back to, in a lot of cases, is it about reducing risk? Is it about efficiency gains? Is it about meeting a statutory obligation? What is the reason? What's the why behind us putting this forward as something that we should do?
I'm just mindful of time, Chris, and
Yep.
give Simon a bit of time as well.
Well, that was me done. So I think if Simon wants to go through, if we've got any questions, I'll try and come back with some more examples. But I know we're going to cover this at the end, but I'm also, if we don't get through all the questions today, I also have to take a phone call because some of this stuff is unique or specific to individual scenarios as well.
Absolutely. Look, that was great overview. Some great tips in there. Simon's details are on the screen, but we'll throw them up again later on. Keep your questions coming through. Sorry, Chris's details are up on the screen. I'm gonna move over to Simon now. How are you, Simon?
Yeah, going well. Thanks, Fergal.
Give us your 30 seconds. Elevator pitch. Who you are, where you come from, and off you go. We'd like to hear your perspectives then, obviously.
Yeah, thanks again. So I've been in local government 25 plus years, probably a little bit longer than it's good for me. And much of that has been in technology. I think I started off at the Gold Coast as the help desk supervisor back in 2002. More recently, I've started working in the private sector, and now work for a company that I own. I've probably done about 100 odd IT projects in government, local government over that time, and the last sort of few years have been in digital transformation. So I've done digital transformations for 10 councils in the last 3 or 4 years. Let me just get my slides up.
And worked across obviously Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria.
Yeah, and South Australia as well.
Right.
And one project in Western Australia. So I've been about a bit.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, Fergal, again. So what I've tried to do today is have a think about projects that have gone really well and the projects that have gone less well, and try to pick up some of the sort of commonalities around which ones go well and which ones don't, so that I've got some practical advice on things that you may want to consider. The first one is, slides to go. Act, is looking at the steering committee. And this is about the steering committee and the governance framework on projects more widely. Particularly digital transformation projects are the difficult, large projects that cross many sections, if not the whole of an organization, the whole of council. If it's done well, it's going to have a significant change or impact on your user base, and that change is difficult. If you've been in local government a while, you've probably got some less than stellar experiences with technology implementations over time, so you can understand why there's some skepticism there. And while the overall benefits from a digital transformation are likely to be overwhelmingly positive, the benefits are often very patchy. So you might get sections that get a great deal of efficiency out of a transformation, but other sections not so much. In fact, you do see sometimes where one section has actually got more work to do after the transformation than they had before. And so with so many competing priorities and such a difficult change, it's so important that you've got your governance structure right and you've got your forum to be able to make the difficult decisions. And in most project framework, that sits with the steering committee. And what I've seen is that steering committees in local government tend to be about the project manager giving a overview on how a project is going. So you'll cover the risks and the schedule and the budget. But behind that, you've got a lot of discontent or concern with the stakeholders because it's difficult for you to make decisions about the trade-offs between one section versus another. And the steering committees need to be that forum. So when you're setting up this governance structure, you need to make sure that your steering committee have you've got the right people in the room. You've got a good mix of senior level people who have the authority to make those difficult decisions. You need to make sure that the steering committee is clear about their authority, clear that they have the right to make the decisions, and the rest of the organization is clear that they have that decision-making authority. As a project manager, you need to make sure that that steering committee is as free as possible to spend the most amount of time on where they provide most value. So with your reporting, you need to be providing those status reports and the budget reports through email where possible, so that they're not spending that time in the meeting going through those documents. You need to make sure that they have got the information that they need to make the decisions, and they've got that information before the meeting, so that no one's going in cold. And you need to, so basically, you just need to make sure that they've got everything that they need to make those decisions, and that's, I guess, what we as project managers can control. And I've seen situations where you've got a project that had real difficulty making those decisions, costing a lot of time and a lot of money because there was lots of rework, there was lots of concern in the project. Decisions that could have easily been made at that senior level if they were brought up to a constructive steering committee. The next point is around, and Chris touched on this, thinking about the part of the project which happens after go live. And with digital transformation projects, if it's done well, you've got a situation where post go live, you've got the first few weeks of fixing the bugs, and you've got your vendor support to do that. And then you've got all of the things that you've missed in your processes. So things that you didn't know until somebody's got something live in their hands, the issues that have been raised that the project missed. So you need to make the changes to the system that you've implemented based on that initial feedback. And you're doing that without quite often without the vendor in the room. And then again, if things have gone well, people have got their hands on a system which is much better than the one they had before, and they start to see the potential of that system, and they start to make requests for changes to happen that they can see. Now they're using it, now they're familiar. And again, you need to have those people in place that can put in those changes. So it's about, where I've seen councils do really well is where they've recognized the fact that they're going to have to upskill their people. Digital transformation needs great people. I've yet to work in a council that doesn't have great people. And if you can engage your people in the project and give them the opportunity that project brings to develop their skills, then you've got people at the end of the project who've got the ability to provide you that support that you need post go live without having to rely on the vendor. And we see people or see councils will bring in project resources to do the project who then leave. And councils that do it differently and bring and give their permanent people the opportunity during the project and then backfill those, if you've got the luxury of being able to backfill your resources, do a lot better than those that rely on a vendor for that support. The next one is the choice of software, and from a technical point of view, the aspect that bites hardest during a project almost every time is the way that systems communicate with each other. And digital transformation and most IT projects these days rely on the flow of information and processes between systems. Where a system doesn't allow that flow, it's rarely fit for purpose. And I think that in this day and age, there really isn't an excuse from vendors not to publish or provide the tools that are required to make their systems play nicely with others. So I think we as an industry need to be putting the interoperability way higher up on our list of priorities when we come to choose software. And we need to, I guess, hold our vendors to account for getting to publish those APIs, make those systems actually play nicely with the other products. Because I can work in an environment where I can bring in new systems to provide particular functionality. It's very difficult if I'm going into an environment where the existing systems just refuse to play ball. I guess
Simon, obviously it's a conversation dear to our heart here, doing a lot of system integration, but at the outset of the project, asking those tough questions, not just saying, people will say, well, they told us they have APIs, but turns out they don't now, or they don't have the APIs they said they have, or they're going to try and charge us for access to it. I think too often that interoperability question is almost an afterthought. It's not core to kind of those initial discussions when a solution has been chosen. Would that be fair to say, or am I just seeing it from my biased version?
Obviously, the people in the room will have a perspective, but certainly my time as a CIO, I saw this happen all the time where those claims were not backed up by reality. I think it's one of those things that you've got to get your vendors to actually demo, to see the information actually flow from system to system, to be able to interrogate their APIs, make sure they do actually do what they say that they're doing.
Good advice.
All right. And finally, and Chris touched on this as well. And that's making sure that you've got that genuine leadership commitment. And it relates to the steering committee piece. But digital transformation is organizational wide. And it needs leadership from everywhere. If you're a councillor or you're driving this from one section and expecting other sections to come on board, then you really are pushing it uphill and are always going to run into difficulty. You have to have support from your CEO and your directors, and that leadership needs to flow into your managers and your coordinators as well. And although you can't make this happen, there is a lot that you can do to influence it, and that's around making sure that you're starting the project off on the right way. You're making sure that your communication is really strong. You're getting the CEO particularly on board, asking him or her to support the project from the beginning very publicly is a very strong sends a very strong message. Because, like I said, with the steering committee, things will get very difficult, and without that uh, consistency of support across the business, it's very difficult. And I want to leave with one, I guess, piece of advice, and that's that the sort of 10 minutes, which when I started doing it, probably made more or made a bigger difference than anything else I've ever done in my career. And that's before you start, sit down with your major stakeholders and do a little bit of an exercise where you ask them to literally write down on a piece of paper what success looks like in 12 months. And when I first did this, I was amazed at how 10 people could have heard the same message, same time, the same way, and come out of it with completely different views on what the project was trying to achieve. And it was a bit of a laugh and a bit of fun, but it really underlined how divergent the people leading this project were. And it really helped us to work on getting that alignment, making sure that we had the conversations there and then about the misunderstandings, and that probably saved hundreds of thousands of dollars in that particular project, because we cleared up some things at the very beginning that would have bitten us really, really hard. So yeah, that's the piece of advice that I'll leave people with. That saved me a hell of a lot of time and effort in my time. So that's where I'm going to leave it. Hopefully there's some questions.
I am just on that. We might share the working backwards methodology as well with in a follow up email to this with people, because it really touches on the same thing, and some examples of how we use it. So let's do that, Nick. While Nick's bringing up those questions, yesterday when we spoke, Simon, we talked about I think two councils that were beside each other that were running the same project. Would you just tell us that story again? Tell us why one was successful and one wasn't.
Yeah, and this is kind of the two projects were really interesting because they were literally done almost at the same time. Councils were of similar sizes, and the functionality that they were looking for was almost identical. One council didn't get their governance structure right. They didn't have a good steering committee. The decision making wasn't clear from the start. They had a lot of ownership discrepancies. So no one knew who owned the e-forms, for instance. Every section thought that they owned theirs. Customer service section thought that they owned them all, and there were problems like that throughout the process, and no way for the project to get those resolved. And that alone cost about, you know, probably at least 50%. One cost 50% more than the other, and the main difference was that lack of clear ownership and lack of ability to make decisions. That was the only difference between the two. One cost, I'm not going to say how much, but 100% more than the other. Same deliverables. One took twice as long. That was obviously the expensive one, but they came out with pretty much exactly the same thing. And just that difference made a huge impact at the other end.
Amazing. Question for both of you. And it was asked at the outset, but we couldn't have a webinar without touching on AI in today's world, I suppose. So what do Simon and Chris think are the biggest barriers to AI adoption in local government? Or are there any? Who wants to take that one first?
I can. What, do you want to go first, Simon, or me?
I'll have a give it a slug. Yeah. Look, I think no different to anywhere else. It's governance and security. The council's got to get the governance right around having transparency around decision making, and how they deal with private data, and how they keep those AI systems secure and protect the data that's in there. I don't have a silver bullet for that, but like everyone else, that's until you get those right, I don't think we're going to see a massive adoption.
The only thing I'd probably add to that is education. So, in particular, inside councils, I see a lot of people get nervous with AI and understanding privacy of data and AI. So a lot of people get taught that you can use Copilot if it's inside your own tenancy, so you can protect your confidential data. I think people are a bit nervous about using AI inside the organisation unless you've got education and a governance policy in place around that. But I think if it's well managed, I've seen some councils who, once they have their policy in play and they've educated their staff on what can and can't go through AI engines, it can be very, very powerful. I think in a lot of ways it's probably more so what resources and time do the council have for people to actually get in there and use it and see what it can do. Most people, or a lot of people, are using AI in their personal life. They've just got to find that balance of how can I use it in my professional life.
I'll add to that. I think it has to be driven by a problem or a distinct use case. Sometimes I think there's a danger that it's a solution looking for a problem. Yeah. And certainly the AI projects we've been doing, it's where we've found a really good use case that's a problem that needs to be solved, and AI can help solve that problem for them, I suppose.
I might just on the other question that got asked around prioritise of work and Mark's question around remembering that an IT project is often a business project, I might just almost pull those two together. In terms of the prioritisation of work, one of the things I do see quite a bit is IT teams will come up with a program of works. The business will come up with a program of works. Some of the business's program of works will be IT related, and that is one of the things that I do find councils sometimes do find difficult to manage, is that if the budget process and the design process is not being pulled together at the same time with the same group of people, that's what often leads to an overloading of the resources that you're expecting to do these works. So something around that before your capital works and before your budget lists go on public exhibition, understanding those business projects and the IT projects and how they relate is really important. Most do it around 1st of July because it's a good time to refresh the last year, but it is different in every organisation.
Right. Just before we keep going, and I'm happy to keep on if there's more questions and keep the discussion going, but we do try and I know people will have to run off after an hour. A couple of things I want to promote is the two lads. So before I run to Ronan, your contact details are on there. Your 20 seconds. When should people contact you? what's the trigger for them to contact you guys?
Simon?
This is your chance to spruik for work, of course, but and I know not if you do that, but I think it would be useful for the group to understand.
For me, it's any time that you need some help with your technology, where you believe that an outside perspective that isn't linked to a vendor, and that really understands and knows councils like the back of their hand, is when you should be giving us a call. I'm sure it's the same with Chris. We both been in councils a long time, done a lot of work here, and I guess really know the space. So where you've got something that's difficult, that you need some help with, then please reach out.
Chris?
Yep. And pretty similar. A lot of people contact us either for some help around software upgrades, depending around some of the core local government products, but often we'll just get phone calls around being a sounding board. We're thinking about doing this. We've hit this issue, and just call up for a chat. And then if things work out, they do. And if not, we try and share some of the experience we've had as best we can.
Which is a nice segue. So I think, what we see with you guys is wisdom. You've got the runs on the board. I just want to very quickly talk about our next webinar, which is a call, The Return of Wisdom, and it's all around AI and what are the skill sets that leaders are going to need in the coming AI world. We've got Professor Rona McDonald, who expert in critical thinking, a humanities professor out of Melbourne University. This one will be a cracker. So I think Nick has thrown the link into the chat there, so everybody's welcome, no cost to join. So on that note, and then finally, there's an AI Innovate conference in City of Melbourne are holding it in Davidson and AWS. Our advisor, Michael Fagan, has been on the call here, is speaking at it again. A great speaker and a good lineup. So if you can get to Melbourne on the 2nd, 3rd of September, that is well worth attending. So I want to thank everybody for jumping on. I'm happy to stick on for a few minutes and keep the conversation going if the guys want to kind of bring up any other thoughts. But we'll conclude here with the formalities, and we'll hang around and see if there's any other questions that we can help you with.